Hello, welcome to our podcast. My name is Lorelai.
And my name is Emma. Today, we're going to be discussing a very important topic that has a love-hate relationship in society, and that is inequality rights in the LGBTQ community. Now we know some of you on here might really like or maybe even love this podcast, but I know some people won't at all, and that's okay. We're just here to explain more in depth of this very important topic and to bring some real life situations of some friends of ours.
We always hear about the LGBTQ community on the news, on our social media outlets, or in our schools. And the LGBTQ community is making a stand in our world. They're making themselves known to the public and taking it by charge. But when we hear about it, do we really listen to what they have to say? Do we really know what it is, what the LGBT community is, what it even stands for? Or do we just start to judge off what we hear off social media and from our friends?
Alex and Brandon are both friends with one of the teachers that are helping us with this project. They both are openly gay and were willing to share their stories with us. We have an idea of what the LGBT community is, but we wanted to hear the views of people who are actually a part of the community. This is really important because people in the non-queer community can sometimes be ignorant to people who are a part of the queer community, and Brandon knows this.
There are elements of being queer that non-queer folk don't realize or don't fully understand. And let me tell you a story about that. So once I was with a friend and his wife, and I was moping about being single and how difficult it was to find a partner. They looked at me a bit confused and said, "Why don't you just go to a bar, find a cute guy, and give him your number?" And I explained that for people in the queer community, it's not as simple as just expressing an interest in anyone that catches your eye. What if this particular person was straight? What if they weren't comfortable with a man expressing interest in them? What if they had an extreme prejudice against queer people and dealt with that prejudice violently? There's an inherent risk, even today, in publicly expressing our membership in this community. And that understanding and the compassion that follows is, for me, one of the defining elements of our community.
We also wanted to know what the LGBTQ community meant to people who were in it. So we asked questions to Brandon and Alex to see their views.
Everyone in this community understands what it's like to live in a society that's only just starting to accept us. Social progress can be slow, painful, and sometimes regresses. All members of the queer community share a history of struggling for that acceptance and struggling to be seen as people, just like any other.
I think this is a really true statement because our social progress can be slow and regressive because people are still stuck in a mindset of if you are a different sexuality, you are lesser or less important.
Yeah.
And people really need to get out of that mindset and be accepting of everyone.
Yeah. Like, people can be very judgy, but there's other people who can be very okay with it.
But even in the LGBTQ community, there are different views.
The LGBTQ community is very diverse and complicated in and of itself. This may or may not surprise many people, but there's a great deal of inequality even within the LGBTQ community. The community is complicated because it incorporates so many unique people and groups and doesn't always have the unity that one would expect. Within the LGBTQ community, there is also the gay community, the lesbian community, the transgender, transsexual community, the genderqueer, non-binary communities, and so many more. We're all united in the LGBTQ community, however, there's a lack of awareness and understanding amongst the different parts of the community. Many members in one group are often not as supportive or understanding of the other groups or people who are different than themselves. And this extends beyond just difficulties within the actual LGBTQ community and encompasses negative views of other races, ethnicities, and gender, to name a couple. Even members of the LGBTQ community are still susceptible to attitudes and behaviors of racism, discrimination, and despite the great amount of support and love that does exist within the community, I think many people in the LGBTQ community forget that it's our responsibility to advocate for other groups as well. We can't live in isolation and only put our rights first, but we must become allies and advocates for all marginalized individuals and cannot expect support for our rights if we're not doing the same for others.
I think, just like Alex said, people fail to realize that there is inequality in the LGBT community. It is such a diverse group of people, and with that many people, it is understandable that there is some tension.
I agree. People in this community need to be advocates for themselves so equality between people can come about.
Even with so many people in this community, there are still many differentiating views, and sometimes these views affect others. Sometimes it could be your friends and family, and from Brandon, we have learned that.
The majority of people weren't fazed by it. I remember telling one of my friends, Nadine, while we were shopping in the mall, and I just told her, like, Nadine, I have to tell you something. I like this boy. She was like, yeah, I know. Real casually, and that was the end of it. Other people who weren't my friends anyway used it as an excuse to make fun of me and harass me, but they were doing that before I came out anyway, so it wasn't that big of a change. Before homeroom, these two classmates in particular delighted in pretending that they had something to show me on their phones, and it would just be like pictures of naked guys or whatever. I'd rolled my eyes, they'd laugh, and that was that. Life went on for the most part. My queerness was never really a sticking point with my parents. Like I mentioned above, we didn't really have a strong tradition of communication in my family, and I was content to not come out to them specifically, at least for a while. I always planned to in the long run, but they knew I was gay though, and in the middle of an argument confronted me about it. Them essentially outing me before I was ready to share that part of my life with them was a source of tension for a bit. But in the end, it was never the queerness that was the problem. So I guess you could say they support me in this.
People's reactions are always changing. So when people see things that they don't agree with, they make other people feel lesser. And as horrible as that is, Alex had this happen to him.
I was briefly dating someone when I first moved to New York City. Once, when we were at Whole Foods, we had shared a very small kiss in the entryway for only a brief second, and a woman nearby had made her disgust known to us with kind of a grunt, and she said, "You really shouldn't do that in public." I had to just simply smile at her and, meet her hate with love as I told her, "I hope you have a great day, ma'am."
It is so upsetting to hear so much aggression and hate. People need to learn how to love and accept one another. We all need to learn that love is love. And if you have negative views, you shouldn't. It's just love.
I can understand different religions have different views, but as life goes on, we cannot isolate people based on their sexualities.
Although hate is controlling, I know people can be so consumed by it that it changes their views on certain matters. And the LGBTQ community is not immune to this discrimination. As Alex says,
Mistreatment of other groups comes in many different forms. Sometimes it's outright discrimination and hate, but more commonly, it's seemingly innocent statements and microaggressions. Some of the statements that hurt me the most are the ones that are not intentionally hurtful. Things like, "I love having a gay friend," "Gay guys are the best shoppers," or "Gay guys have the best taste in everything." These statements reinforce stereotypes and make individuals who are gay feel like an accessory.
Hate can come in many different forms, and in this podcast, we learned that. And here are Brandon's responses.
Like I mentioned, there was a small group of guys at my school who gave me crap for it, and I'd get the occasional faggot flung at me. Even though I was usually very self-conscious and hyper-aware of how others perceive me, this didn't really bother me, weirdly enough. I was lucky to mostly avoid violence stemming from my situation, except one time when someone punched me in the face, because he thought I was coming on to him. I wasn't, of course, but I've come to realize that people in marginalized groups often suffer the consequences of other people's unfounded, irrational fears.
in the end, you're part of a community. You're part of a group of people that have had similar experiences to your own. And you might not even realize it, but you are a part of something bigger.
Yeah, it's like you have a weight off your shoulders and you can truly be who you want to be.
Thank you. And that's all for today. We hope you stay tuned for our next podcast.
Toodaloo!